Ears that once delighted in worldly praise now heard only screams. The tongue that once savored delicacies now tasted nothing but ash and acid. "Lord," Bridget asked, her voice breaking, "when did his punishment begin?" Christ answered, "Accursed be his first hour in hell that never will end." From the first moment he entered this place, every moment has been the same. There is no relief. There is no pause. There is no second when the burning stops or the darkness lifts. The first hour continues forever. Part 3. The body that betrayed the soul. The vision deepened. Bridget found herself seeing another condemned soul, this one even more difficult to witness than the first. "Lord, who is this?" Bridget asked. Christ said, "This is one who lived for the flesh. Watch what the flesh becomes." The figure before her barely resembled anything human. His ears looked like a blacksmith's bellows that continuously fanned the whole brain with their flapping. The same ears that once heard temptation and consented, now instruments of perpetual torment, pumping pain through his skull without rest. His eyes looked like they were inside out, sunken all the way in and attached to the back of his head. The same eyes that gazed upon what was forbidden, now twisted backward, forced to see only the interior of his own damnation. His mouth was open, and his tongue was pulled out through his nostrils and hanging down to his lips. The mouth that spoke words of seduction, the tongue that tasted forbidden pleasures, now grotesquely distorted, a mockery of the senses that once served his sin. "Lord," Bridget cried out, "I cannot look at this." "It is too much." "You must look," Christ said. "This is what sin becomes when it reaches its destination. This is what awaits those who choose flesh over spirit. Look at what he wears." Bridget forced herself to observe. The soul's skin looked like an animal hide just hanging over his body, loose, detached, no longer part of him but draped across him like a garment of shame. He was dressed in a cloth that was like a sheet drenched with the evidence of his sins, a cloth so icy cold that anyone who saw it shivered, yet somehow burning at the same time. Pus oozed out of it as from a wound with putrid blood. The very garment of his shame produced endless infection, endless discharge, endless physical corruption. "Why does he wear this?" Bridget asked. "Why is he clothed in his own corruption?" "Because he clothed himself in corruption during his life," Christ answered. "What you see now is not a punishment imposed from outside. It is the truth of what he chose, made visible. He dressed his soul in filth. Now his soul wears what it always wore, only now he cannot pretend otherwise." The condemned soul spoke, and his voice carried across the darkness of hell with terrible clarity. He cried 5 woes, 5 acknowledgments of what had brought him to this place. "Woe is me," the soul cried, "because I am dressed in my own filth forever. Woe is me, because I loved the pleasure of my sinful body and flesh. Woe is me, for all my worldly riches and pride. Woe is me, because my first hour in hell will never end. Woe is me, because I cannot die, and I cannot escape, and I cannot hope." "Lord," Bridget asked, "what did he do that was so terrible? Was he a murderer? Did he betray nations? Did he deny the faith publicly?" Christ's answer struck at assumptions Bridget had not known she held. "He lived for physical pleasure," Christ said. "That is all. He did not murder. He did not betray nations. He simply made his body his God. He worshipped comfort. He served appetite. Every day he chose what felt good over what was good. Every day he fed his flesh and starved his soul. And this is where such choices lead." Bridget struggled to understand. "But Lord," she said, "so many people live this way. So many pursue pleasure above all else. Are they all?" Christ interrupted her. "Yes, unless they repent, unless they turn, unless they recognize that the body is meant to serve the soul, not rule over it. The body will return to dust either way. The soul will exist forever either way. The only question is where, and that is decided by which master a person serves during the brief years they walk the earth. Bridget looked again at the condemned soul, at the bellows ears, and the inside-out eyes, and the tongue pulled through the nostrils. She looked at the sheet of frozen filth, the oozing pus, the animal hide skin, and she understood that this was not arbitrary cruelty. This was truth made visible. This was sin reaching its final form. Part 4. The punishment of each sin. "Let me show you how each sin is punished," Christ said. "Watch carefully. What you see here is not cruelty imposed from outside. It is truth revealed. It is sin reaching its final destination. Each punishment matches the sin that earned it, because in eternity there is no more hiding. And no more pretending, no more separation between what a soul chose and what that choice becomes." Bridget steeled herself. "Show me, Lord. I must understand so that I can warn others." The vision opened onto a vast expanse of suffering, and Christ began to guide her through it. First, Christ said, "See those who were ruled by pride." Bridget saw souls that had once been beautiful, or at least had believed themselves beautiful. They had walked through life with heads held high, looking down upon others, demanding recognition, requiring honor, insisting on their own superiority. Now they existed in states of complete and utter humiliation. They who had exalted themselves above others were now beneath all others. They who had demanded honor were now stripped of all honor. They who had looked down upon their fellow humans now crawled in positions of absolute degradation. But the worst torment, Bridget observed, was internal. They still felt their pride. That was the horror of it. They still felt they deserved better. They still believed themselves superior to the souls around them. But the belief brought no comfort, only additional suffering. Every moment they experienced the gap between what they believed they deserved and what they received. Their pride had not been taken from them. It had become their prison. They were trapped inside their own sense of superiority while existing in conditions that mocked that sense without relief. "Lord," Bridget whispered, "their faces, they still look contemptuous even as they suffer." Christ answered, "Because they have not changed. They cannot change. The time for change has ended. The pride they cultivated in life is now fixed forever. They despise their surroundings. They despise their fellow damned. They despise their torments. And that very despising adds to their torment, because pride in hell has nothing to feed on except its own starvation." The vision shifted, and Bridget saw those who had been consumed by greed. These souls bore the weight of invisible chains, unlike anything Bridget had witnessed. They were bent double under burdens they could not set down. They carried the weight of everything they had valued more than God, every coin hoarded, every possession clutched, every opportunity for generosity refused. In hell that weight was infinite. They staggered under it. They crawled under it. They could not stand upright. The most burning river flowed into their mouths continuously, but their bellies could never be filled. They consumed and remained empty. They grasped and held nothing. Bridget could barely look at their twisted forms. "Lord," she asked, "why do they still reach for things?" "Because greed is what they are," Christ explained. In life, they chose accumulation over love. That choice has become permanent. They will reach forever because reaching is all they know how to do. The vision shifted again, and Bridget saw those consumed by lust. These souls burned with a fire that Bridget struggled to describe. It was not simply external flame, though that was present. It was internal fire, a perpetual unsatisfied desire that consumed from within. Their eyes were filled with a hunger that could never be fed. They reached constantly for pleasures that always receded, grasping at shadows that dissolved at their touch. The grasping went on forever, without a moment of satisfaction. Their bodies, which they had made into idols, had become sources of unending torment. The skin that once felt pleasure now felt only burning. The nerves that once transmitted excitement now transmitted only pain. Every sensation had been inverted. What had felt good now felt like agony, and the agony never stopped. Bridget saw souls dressed in garments of their own filth, frozen sheets that burned simultaneously, oozing corruption, trapping them in the evidence of what they had pursued. She saw the man from earlier, the bellows ears, the inside-out eyes, the tongue through the nostrils, and understood now that he was one of countless such souls, each bearing the marks of what they had worshipped. "Lord," Bridget cried out, "they seem to want something they cannot name. Even here, even burning, they seem to be searching. They are searching for the satisfaction that sin promised but never delivered," Christ said. In life, lust told them that the next pleasure would finally satisfy. It lied. Every pleasure demanded another. Now that lie continues forever. They seek satisfaction that does not exist in the direction they are looking, and they cannot turn around. The vision shifted to those who had nurtured anger. Bridget watched in horror as these souls tore at themselves and at each other with uncontrolled fury. In life, they had wounded others with their rage. In hell, that rage had turned inward and outward simultaneously. They were both tormentors and tormented, attacking and being attacked without rest. The wounds they inflicted healed instantly, so they could be inflicted again. They struck and were struck. They screamed and heard screaming. Their hatred had no object that could finally satisfy it. They hated God, but could not reach him. They hated each other, but could not destroy each other. The rage simply circulated, building in intensity, finding no release. Bridget turned away from the violence. "Is there no peace for them, Lord?" "Anger was their peace," Christ answered. "They chose it. They fed it. Now it is all they have. The fire they kindled in their hearts burns forever because they refused to let it be extinguished when extinguishing was still possible." The vision shifted again to those who had lived by falsehood. Their tongues were pierced and re-pierced by instruments Bridget could not fully describe, sharp, glowing, entering through the mouth and exiting through places mouths should not connect. Every false word, every deceptive word, every manipulative word had become solid things that returned to wound them. Lies they had told decades before came back as physical objects that cut and burned. In life, they had used language to mislead and manipulate. In hell, language was used upon them. They heard their own lies spoken back in voices that mocked. Every person they had deceived, every trust betrayed, all of it returned. "Lord," Bridget asked, "are those their own words entering their mouths?" "Those are truth," Christ said, "truth entering where lies came out. In life they made their mouths into instruments of deception. Now their mouths receive what they refuse to give." Finally, the vision showed Bridget those who had led others into sin. These souls bore not only the weight of their own sins, but the weight of every sin they had caused in others. The teacher of evil suffered for every student. The corrupter suffered for every soul corrupted. The chain of influence extended endlessly, backward to those who had corrupted the corrupter, forward to those who would be corrupted by those the corrupter had corrupted. Bridget saw souls buried under avalanches of guilt that were not entirely their own, but were entirely their responsibility. A single act of corruption had multiplied through generations, and the soul who had started it all felt each multiplication as additional weight, additional fire. "Lord," Bridget whispered, "some of them seem not to understand why they carry so much." "They did not track their influence in life," Christ explained. "They corrupted and forgot. They planted seeds of destruction and never watched them grow. Now they see the full harvest. As long as anyone on earth still sins because of what these souls taught, the weight increases." Bridget fell to her knees before Christ, overwhelmed by what she had witnessed. Each punishment matched each sin with terrible precision. Pride that demanded exaltation received humiliation. Greed that pursued fullness received emptiness. Lust that sought pleasure received burning. Anger that attacked others attacked itself. Lies that wounded through words received wounds through words. Corruption that spread outward returned inward multiplied. There was no randomness here. There was no cruelty for its own sake. There was only truth, truth that could no longer be avoided, truth that sin had always been, but that sinners had always been able to deny. Until now, until forever. Part 5. The Mother Damned for What She Taught. "Lord," Bridget said, "show me what you mean. Show me how this works." Christ turned her toward another vision, and Mary, the Blessed Virgin, appeared beside her. "I will show you 3 wretched women," Mary said. "One is in hell, one is in purgatory, one is still alive. Watch how they are connected." The vision opened onto a soul so distorted that Bridget struggled to identify it as human. The vertebrae of her back were all dissolved, each from the other, one going up while another went down, never ceasing their movement. Constant instability, constant internal conflict, eternal restlessness. A long and large serpent came forth from the nether part of her stomach, joining its head and tail together as a round bow, going round about her bowels continually like a wheel, never stopping, never resting, perpetually consuming and being consumed. Her hips and her legs seemed like 2 rough staves of thorns full of most sharp prickles, every surface pain, every position agony. Her feet were like toads. "Who is this?" Bridget asked. "This is a mother," Mary explained. "In life, she was beautiful. In life, she was admired. She taught her daughter everything she knew, how to attract attention, how to cultivate vanity, how to worship at the altar of her own reflection. She made herself fair as an angel, and then she deformed and misshaped herself so that she became more like the devil than an angel of God. But here is what makes her punishment unique," Mary continued. "Her daughter is still alive, and every time that daughter sins the sins her mother taught her, the mother's torment intensifies. The condemned mother spoke